Hello and welcome to After the Headlines. I'm Sarza. When we talk about war, we often talk about strategy and security, but rarely do we talk about the full cost of war and who actually pays for it. So let's start with what we are seeing right now. Images emerging from Iran show damage not just to infrastructure, but to places like Golestan Palace, a UNESCO-recognized heritage site. And when something like that is damaged, the loss is not just physical. It is cultural. It is historical. It is civilizational. War does not only destroy buildings, it erases memory. And when memory disappears from humanity, societies lose their sense of continuity, their connection to the past. In a way, war risks pushing us toward a world that is increasingly ahistorical, where stories, symbols, and shared heritage begin to vanish. But the cost doesn't stop there. It also reshapes the environment, often in ways that are invisible in the moment but devastating over time. In Iran, strikes on oil depots and refineries have triggered massive fires. Those fires release hydrocarbons and toxic particles into the atmosphere. And when rain falls through that polluted air, it can return as what observers describe as black rain, carrying soot, petroleum compounds, and chemical residues back into the soil and water. They linger, they seep into ecosystems, they affect agriculture, food systems, and human health for years, sometimes for decades. And this is not unique to one country. In southern Lebanon, there have been growing concerns about environmental damage linked to conflict dynamics. Reports of chemical exposure and herbicide use near agricultural land have raised questions about long-term soil degradation and food safety. So, war does not just redraw borders, it redraws the entire landscape. And those changes are often irreversible, just like loss of lives. Then there is displacement. Even in the early stages of this conflict, people are already on the move, crossing borders, seeking safety. But the world they're entering is very different. Migration pathways are narrowing, borders are tightening. Political rhetoric around refugees is becoming more and more hostile by the day. So war creates not just immediate displacement, but long chains of uncertainty, where people are forced to move, but have fewer places to go. And then there is something even less visible, the psychological cost. Studies show that nearly half of children in conflict zones exhibit signs of toxic stress. Among soldiers, long-term trauma is also well documented. And what is often overlooked is that this trauma does not end with one generation. It is carried forward as intergenerational trauma across families, across time. War leaves an emotional imprint that outlives the battlefield. But here is where the conversation becomes even more uncomfortable. Because while these costs are widespread, the gains of war are often concentrated, solid, and visible. War activates an entire economic system. Energy markets react, prices shift, risk is priced in, capital moves, and for some actors, war creates enormous opportunities, not for societies, but within markets. And then there is the question of how war is financed. Because modern wars are not just fought with weapons, they are financed through debt. Governments financing wars are not only paying for wars, they're also borrowing to pay for that war. They issue bonds, and those bonds are bought by investors across the world, which means war is often funded today, but paid for tomorrow. By who? By future taxpayers. The wars of early 21st century have already shown us this pattern. Trillions of dollars in spending, much of it financed through borrowing, with costs that go on to accumulate long after the war itself ends. So when we ask why do wars persist despite their enormous human, environmental, and financial costs, part of the answer lies in this imbalance. Because costs are dispersed across civilians, ecosystems generations, but the gains are often concentrated. And that is the calculus of war. It is not just about who wins or loses on the battlefield. It is about how the costs are distributed and counted, and how the system goes on to sustain itself. Because the true balance sheet of war is not written in headlines. It is written in poisoned soil, in displaced families, in long-term intergenerational trauma, and in debts that outlive the conflict itself. Thank you for listening. This is After the Headlines. I'm Sarza. If this episode made you think a little differently about the cost of war, feel free to share or engage or stay in the conversation. Until next time.